Hello, welcome to this project. My name's Coco, and in this project I will be exploring timbre in the funk fusion genre through instrumentation. So essentially, what I'm wondering is, why does this genre of music just sound the way that it sounds? Funk fusion is my most listened to genre of music and probably my favorite genre of music. So instrumentation is the organization and specification of instruments in a piece. So essentially it can make a genre of music just sound like that genre. So for example, rock music is distinctly rock and has that rock sound because of the drum set, the electric bass and guitar, and the contemporary vocals. And Hawaiian music sounds distinctly Hawaiian because of the ukulele. If you replace the ukulele with an electric guitar, then it wouldn't quite sound the same. Timbre is the sound quality or tone quality of a note played on a particular instrument. It's essentially what makes one instrument just sound like that instrument. For example, composers would often use flutes to mimic birds as opposed to using a tuba. So now let's dive into funk fusion. A fusion musical genre mixes two or more genres together, incorporating elements from each one to form a new sound influenced by the parent genres. This project specifically explores Japanese funk fusion, and it's different from American and Western jazz fusion artists. Japanese fusion is a style of music heavily influenced by Western jazz, soul, and funk, but it has a completely Japanese take. Jazz was first embraced and popularized in Japan after World War II while Japan was rebuilding. The United States occupied Japan from the mid-1940s into the early 1950s, providing the opportunity for American musicians to present themselves to the Japanese market. American jazz musicians, particularly top black artists, were migrating to Europe post-World War II to escape racial discrimination in the United States, with some ending up settling in Japan. Lots of Japanese jazz musicians began to mimic and impersonate American jazz artists, and by the 1960s, modern jazz began to pick up and more Japanese artists popped up. The 1970s was a major turning point around the world in mainstream music, a transitional period from traditional big band and pop standard to funk and hip-hop, and fusing those two genres. Jazz became influenced by the growing relevance of the funk genre, which popularized strong backbeat grooves and a more electrified sound with the introduction of early analog synthesizers. Soul, R&B, disco, and progressive rock followed as common points of inspiration in the jazz community, and the funk fusion genre started to form around the 70s and was strongly tied in with the technological developments of instruments during the 70s, particularly synthesizers and electric pianos. So Buckaroo, a Japanese magazine, described 1970s Japanese jazz as, quote, a product of its cultural environment and social milieu, clearly defined by its elements and easily recognizable by its inspiration. There's definitely more to explore regarding jazz history in Japan, though in the interest of time, I'm just scraping the surface and providing basic context. To tackle this question, I figured why not make two different recordings of the same funk fusion song, but changing the instrumentation and timbre to see how it affects the overall outcome of the song. So I took the funk fusion song Fair Wind by Masayoshi Takanaka, who is a very influential composer and guitarist affiliated with the Japanese jazz and funk fusion genre, and I had one recording where the instrumentation is pretty much identical to the original recording, and then I had a second recording where the instrumentation is flipped, so they're all acoustics. So here are the two recordings. So first I will share my initial thoughts. The first thing that I noticed was that the tempo varied. With electric instruments, it's easier to articulate faster than with bowed instruments. So for the bass, it's much easier to pluck faster than it is to bow faster. And the acoustic felt a bit more elastic and malleable, like you could bend and swing and deviate the tempo more easily and naturally compared to the electric recording. I also felt like it was easier to articulate the slides that Takanaka uses with violin more so than guitar, because he plays his guitar as if it's fretless, and those kinds of glisses and slides are easier to replicate on violin than guitar, even though the original recording was done on guitar. Since violin is fretless, I feel like it allows for more bend and movement between pitches. So I gathered opinions from musicians and non-musicians who listened to the two recordings. Some common opinions that were shared were that the character of the melody came out more with the violin. They could hear the violin more than the guitar. It cut through the band more, though that's also due to an error with the recording, as the guitar amp should have been turned up a bit more. But in contrast, one person said that they liked the electric recording better because they felt that the violin overpowered the other instruments. The acoustic was more lyrical, had more movement and intent and expression. And in my opinion, violin is one of the most expressive instruments, as it is the closest instrument that replicates the voice. So it is easier to be expressive on violin than other instruments. The electric recording had more of a driving tempo and felt a bit more urgent. The electric recording had lack of clear distinction between background and foreground, and the instruments meddled together when live, needed to be equalized, and that the instrumentation would work better as a recording rather than live. That is probably one of the biggest struggles with live bands, getting each instrument equal. Another interesting opinion was that the band was more together in the electric recording, but that didn't matter in the acoustic recording because the melody held it together. So back to my original question of why does funk fusion just sound the way that it sounds? In my opinion, I feel like the acoustic version still does sound like funk fusion. I think it's a little less funky, and I think it's more associated with smooth jazz. I think that it's through the attack and release of the instruments. The acoustic can be a bit more delayed for many instruments. The release of electric instruments is quicker than acoustic, so it forces a song to push forward more so than it would in an acoustic setting. The electric recording is more funky than the acoustic one due to the upbeat tempo and crisp attacks of the electric instruments, because there's just something about the electric bass that is just funky. It's not as snappy sounding when it's acoustic, and the effects and sounds of electric guitar are also just very different from violin, and I feel like it gives funk and this genre of music a different flavor. So my last thoughts are that I absolutely love doing this project. I really enjoyed covering guitar and fusion and making it my own, and maybe next time if I get the chance to perform funk fusion, I will do it probably with electric instruments just to keep the energy up and get a chance to play faster. And I just want to extend my gratitude to my amazing friends and musicians in this project who helped me out. It's during finals, so it's a very busy time for everyone, but they took the time to learn this piece, and I'm just so grateful to have such amazing musicians to also call my friends.